fellow poets.
Good evening.
Tonight I'm going to read a prose piece, not a poem, and it's entitled First Night in Brazil. It's a true story. I had a compulsion, I had to go to Brazil. I thought I was going to emigrate there, and this was my first night, very dramatic. Thinking of that dramatic first night, I must go back further in time to 1967, when I had a boyfriend from Blackpool called Ken Booth. He'd given up being a professional footballer in the days before the superstars and spent his time driving me around in an old Silver Cloud Rolls Royce. Ken loved old cars, and so did I. We even drove to Leek, Staffordshire to meet Bunty Scott Moncrief and view his fabulous collection of Rolls Royces, including the famous yellow one hired out to the well-known movie entitled The Yellow Rolls Royce. Ken also drove some Rollses to Milan for Tony Febland from Blackpool, who imported Capodimonte porcelain into the UK. Thus, Ken had social connections in Milan, so when I hitched to the sprawling, ugly metropolis and stayed in a nunnery, no less, I was introduced to the attractive, blonde, bouncy, curvaceous Marisa Mastro Pasqua. I only stayed for one eventful week with Marisa, driving me here and there. She lived in a small, ordinary apartment at a time when it was odd for a single young woman to be living alone. I only met her uncle. She never spoke about her family if she had one. All she said was that she was studying Russian and did modeling work. She even gave me a large studio portrait of herself, a professional one, and I can still see her smiling face looking over her shoulder, frozen in time on the screen of my mind. A couple of years passed with a few Christmas and Easter auguri cards. Then one day I got a phone call that she was at the Hilton, London, with her fiancé and wanted me to meet the man of her dreams. I was going to be invited to the wedding in Milan, who knows when. Her looks had changed. She'd short brown hair, gone with the flowing dyed blonde curly locks. She wore a simple black cocktail dress with classic gold jewellery. This was another sophisticated woman I did not know. I told her I felt compelled to go to Brazil after falling in love with the Portuguese language and the bossa nova of Jobim. I had joined the snobbish Anglo-Brazilian Society for Contacts, had opened a Bolsa account and was going to Portuguese classes at the Casa do Brasil under the auspices of the Brazilian embassy. It was then she told me Franco, her first cousin, was a sports journalist in Sao Paulo. I flew in from London to spend one night there, dumping one of my 2 large suitcases at the British Embassy before speeding off to Iguazu to see the waterfalls, Asunción, capital of Paraguay, and the final destination, Buenos Aires, before returning for 2 weeks to stay with a Brazilian family which had been arranged by letter by the Society in London. They lived somewhere in a wealthy suburb with manicured lawns, far from the cardboard city and street children like Pichot in crime-ridden downtown São Paulo. I had got a 10% Aerolíneas Argentinas open return ticket, having worked for Global Tours for 2 years. The fare in 1970 to the furthest point, Buenos Aires, was £450 with all my stopovers based on the air mileage. Today, in 2016, it is more or less the same return fare without the stopovers in Brazil and Paraguay. So, armed with Franco's phone number, I discovered at the British Embassy that there were more phones than phone lines, and the helpful secretary could not get me a hotel for one night. This was the era prior to Booking.com, when the only guide, apart from the upmarket Fodor, was Fromer's South American guide on $5 a day for the savvy traveller. In desperation, I called Franco, my saviour. After all, I was his cousin's good friend. She had written to him, introducing me, and he'd written back in perfect English, welcoming me and even offering to put me up. The embassy was on the verge of closing for lunch and could only help housing my big case until I returned. Franco and I had lunch, and I knew instantly he was a bore, but I needed a bed. With hindsight, I should have asked him to find me a bed for the night in a hotel. He drove me back to his lair, a concrete tower block in the downtown area of the city. I observed there was a man at the desk in the foyer. Franco put me up in the lift to his minuscule male abode without any taste, a bloke pad. It was autumn and chilly, so he put the heating on. He promised to send a telegram that I had arrived safely to my father's best friend, who supplied all the lingerie to Marks and Spencer's, Uncle Phil. Franco put me to bed and carefully wrapped me in a blanket. It was chilly in the pad, with concrete walls like a prison cell. He went back to the office and promised to be back in time for dinner. Alone, I glanced at his night table and picked up a beautiful hardback Italian full-colour book of couples dressed as harlequins, entwined in Kama Sutra positions, some of which were totally unknown to me. What a beautiful book. I can still recall the stunning colour photographs, if not the positions 45 years on. I fell asleep to be woken by a frustrated Latin lover with a takeaway spaghetti bolognese. He noticed the book had been studied and wanted to discuss the positions. That was the last thing on my mind. I just wanted to go to sleep, as I was already in a nightdress and he had brought a camp bed as promised. It was bedtime. I remember he sat on the bed facing away from me and I said he could leave on the light if he wanted to read. It was 10 o'clock, I recall. He said nothing, holding the book in his hand, flicking through the pages, obviously getting turned on. "Aren't you going to let me in?" said he. Had I heard him correctly? "Aren't you going to let me in?" he repeated. "Are you crazy?" "No," I retorted indignantly. "But you're Marissa's friend, and you know what she is." My God, the realization in all those years I'd known her. I'd never thought of her as a prostitute. "Well, either you let me in or you can leave here and now. Make up your mind." I was horrified and scared. He didn't move, he just spoke like a dummy. I started to whimper and cry, but he wasn't falling for that trick. Then I howled and went hysterical, making a loud noise. He got worried, telling me to be quiet because of the neighbours. I howled like a wolf, even louder. An hour went by like this, me crying and howling, and he sitting with his erotic Bible. I was exhausted with the theatrical performance. I got up, very unsteady, and he made a gesture to touch me as I walked past to the bathroom to get dressed, but more likely to stop me from falling because I was in panic mode, and being a frustrated opportunist, he could not cope with the situation. I got dressed in the dimly lit bathroom, and still sitting on the bed, he watched me slide my big case along the cold tiled floor to the door and exit. Somehow I got into the lift and down to the foyer, collapsing hysterically on the floor. In a garbled melange of Latin languages, I tried to tell the concierge, who was probably from the northeast, that I needed a bed for the remainder of the night. Just then a group of young Brazilians came in and laughing and became very concerned seeing me hunched up on the floor. They spoke English, and one of the girls said I could share her bed, despite having a wooden door under the mattress because she had a bad back. Did I mind? Was she kidding after my psychological ordeal? A Brazilian would never have treated you like that, they proclaimed. Then Franco showed his face peeping down the well of the stairs. I pointed to him, saying, "There he is!" They all shouted how disgraceful his behaviour had been. Shame on him, he was a marked man. He cowered like a frightened animal and fled back into his miserable cell. The group took me out to a local nightclub and plied me with whiskey tots. We all had a great night of gaiety and laughter. I got no sleep and left on a plane with their help to Iguazu the next morning. It was a night to remember, and I recall it vividly, in detail, 45 years later. Wow.